I am the lawyer in my house. Yep, I'm the lawyer, and I fought many cases. Growing up, my favorite words to say were, "It's not fair." Whenever I found myself in a situation that was remotely unfair for one of the parties involved, I couldn't just sit back and watch. I felt it was my duty to interject, protect, defend, and state my case. Now, apparently, when two adults are having a conversation, you're not meant to interject. I learned that one the hard way. One day, I was in the living room, eavesdropping on my parents' conversation, when I noticed my dad blaming my mom for not picking up his perfumes from the shop before they closed, even though she was very busy and he was capable of doing this himself. Hi, Dad. I felt my dad was being unreasonable. So instead of minding my own business like any other normal child, I stepped out of the corner, mentally building my case, and said my favorite words, "Dad, it's not fair." Now, before I could say anything else, my dad said, "If I slap you." Now, despite this mishap, I still won the case because later that night, my dad apologized to my mom. Moral of the story, I'm a firm believer in fair treatment and an equitable world. My mom even calls me defender of the universe. Owning this title, it became my dream to study law, a profession in which I could defend people for a living without getting disciplined by my parents after. More specifically, I wanted to study law in the United States of America, because what better place to study law in the land of the free, right? Or so I thought. As I grew older and became more aware of the world, I came to the realization that the law doesn't actually protect as it should. They say justice for all, but what does that really mean? Sure, there's a system in place to ensure the fair treatment of all people, and we call it the justice system. But is it really a just system? You know, it's called the criminal justice system, but that name doesn't really settle with me, and I prefer to call it the criminal injustice system. Don't get me wrong, the criminal injustice system works, but only if you're wealthy and look a certain way. Sentencing is no longer about the depth of the crime committed, but about the depth of your pocket. As Bernard B. Couric said, American citizens shouldn't lose their constitutional rights because they lack the money to pay for them. Countless people on a daily basis are sentenced to years in prison because they can't afford decent lawyers. Or what about the people who spend months in jail awaiting trial because they can't afford bail? As Brian Stevenson said it in his TED Talk, the justice system treats you better if you're guilty but rich than if you're innocent but poor. It's almost as if being poor is a crime in itself. As if discriminating against social class isn't enough, the criminal justice system discriminates against race too. Black men make up only 6% of America's population, while they make up over 1/3 of the prison population. A black child is 18 times more likely to get charged as an adult than a white child for committing the exact same crime. How can it be that what people are meant to look up to for protection inflicts more harm and fear than safety? Let me tell you a true story. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the story of the Central Park Five, but for those who aren't, 5 teenage boys, aged 14 to 16, were wrongly prosecuted for the rape of a young girl in Central Park. There was no DNA evidence connecting them to the crime, no evidence at all, for that matter, but they lost the case based on clearly coerced and tortured confession tapes. Imagine being 14 years old, facing a judge, a jury, and state lawyers, and knowing they chose to make you guilty, even though you were innocent. The boys faced between 6 to 13-year sentences, one of which was put in adult prison. When the actual serial rapist confessed 13 years later, the last of the 5 boys, Kerry Wise, was released. They were given $41 million to compensate for their wrongful conviction. Yes, that's a lot of money. But can any amount of money make up for the 13 years of life missed? Can any amount of money make up for the missed days of youth spent going to the park and hanging out with friends? Can money buy you back the experience of being a free child? Imagine being 16, spending 13 years in adult prison, getting beat up by inmates for a crime you didn't commit. Carrie Wise and the rest of the Central Park Five aren't the only people to experience this. Between 2 to 10% of America's prison population are innocent. That sounds like a small amount. But if you're looking at America's estimated prison population of 2.3 million people, that's about 46 to 230,000 innocent people that are kept behind bars. Does that still sound like a small amount? To this day, America still has the highest incarceration rate in the world. America's crime rates have been decreasing while the incarceration rates rapidly increase. I want you to think about that for a second. Even though less crimes are being committed, more people are being arrested, and more people's lives are being ruined. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you just got out of a 5-year prison sentence for what should be considered a minor crime. You're ready to restart and resume your life and decide you want to finish your education. So you decide to apply to college, and you complete a beautiful college application. But as soon as you check that box felon, your rights to welfare, public housing, and student loans are stripped from you. Or maybe you want to apply for a job. You complete the job application and hesitantly check that box, felon. And as soon as you check that box, every decent job you apply for turns you down. Let's put this into perspective. The unemployment rate for a Black woman in the United States is 6.4%. The unemployment rate for a formerly incarcerated Black woman in the United States is 43.6%. That's a 37.2% increase in unemployment. Now, getting back to the story, you applied for a job, no place would hire you because you were incarcerated, but you need to make money to take care of your wife who just gave birth to a little girl. So, what do? How do you support your family if no one will hire you because of a minor crime you committed in your irresponsible teenage years? You think about this for a while, and as a last resort, you hesitantly get yourself involved in crime. Why? Why do you get yourself involved in crime? I'll tell you why. Because as Trevor Noah put it, crime does the one thing the government doesn't do. Crime cares. Crime is grassroots. Crime looks for young kids who need support and a lifting hand. Crime offers internship programs, opportunities for advancement, part-time jobs. Crime doesn't discriminate. So, if my 10-year-old self knew that studying law in the United States would mean taking part in a punishment system designed to create a cycle of crime, a system that paints its victims as criminals and recycles them back into captivity, a system that puts people in this paralyzing state of freedom in which they are given a life, but a life so limited, you may as well call it prison. If my 10-year-old self knew all of this, then studying law in the United States would be the last thing I'd want to do. And that's a problem. There are so many people who are complacent with the state of the criminal justice system because they believe it doesn't affect them or that it's a political issue. This isn't just a political issue, it's a people issue. The judges, the juries, the lawmakers, the lawyers, they're all people. And we as people need to start changing the way we treat each other, because tomorrow your son or daughter could be the next victim of the system, or even you could be the next victim of this system. The criminal justice system has become a two-headed monster, and I believe we need to tame it before it comes back to haunt its enforcers. Thank you.